Hi guys, it's me, Mr. Bertoch, your incredibly handsome science teacher. In this video, we're going to learn about the first law, Newton's first law of motion. So really smart people like you are able to close their mind, no, false, close their eyes and use their mind to think about how the universe works. There are a lot of smart people who have done this, like Einstein and a guy named Isaac Newton and many others who have the ability to use their imagination. And that's important because in science, sometimes you can do actual experiments. Sometimes you can take things in the real universe and experiment on them. Other times you can't. Sometimes the things that you want to experiment on, we just don't have the technology at the time. And so you have to do the experiment in your mind. You have to actually imagine the experiment and try and keep track of what would really truly happen. And this is an amazing ability that very smart people like you have to be able to think and imagine experiments. So, one such person, as I mentioned a second ago, who had this ability to do thought experiments was a guy named Isaac Newton. And honestly, he is probably one of the most intelligent human beings that has ever lived. And his discoveries are just incredible. The things that he has, the contributions that he's made to mankind are incredible. Sometimes he made discoveries like just because he was mad at somebody and he was just going to prove a point. And then he invented a whole new branches of science just out of spite. He invented calculus. He figured out how light works. He invented prisms. He created the laws of motion. Well, he didn't create them, I guess. He discovered them. He discovered how gravity works. And again, he didn't create gravity. I mean, gravity existed before Newton, but he figured out how gravity works. And he figured out how the human eye works by poking himself in the face, in the eye, and experimenting on his own eyeball. But one of the most fascinating discoveries, in my opinion, and there are several actually that were very fascinating that he discovered, but one of them to me that I think is pretty amazing are the thought experiments he did on motion. Because you have to understand that Isaac Newton lived in a time when there were no spaceships, right? There was no space shuttle program or, rockets that you could take into space. You couldn't experience weightlessness. It wasn't possible. So Newton could not experiment on how things move in weightlessness. It's not a possible experiment he could do. He had to do the experimenting in his brain. And yet, hundreds of years later, when mankind finally did have the ability to go into space and actually test for reals his experiments, well, gosh, it turns out that all of his thought experiments were not only accurate, but they were spot on accurate. That is how awesome his brain was. He was able to imagine outer space and imagine weightlessness and figure out how things would move and create 3 laws of motion that ended up being hundreds of years later, when you can actually, for reals, test them, ended up being 100% correct. So in this video, we're going to talk about the first law of motion. And then I'll talk about the second, third laws of motion in other videos. The first law of motion is called the law of inertia. And it very simply states that an object in motion will stay in motion forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Oh, and also forever. Unless it's acted upon by an outside force, and an object at rest will remain at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. What exactly does that mean? What does it mean that an object in motion will stay in motion? So if I take a baseball and I go into outer space and I throw that baseball, what's going to happen to it? How long is it going to keep moving in the direction I threw it and at the speed that I threw it? How long is that going to continue going like that? Forever, right? Oh, and also forever. And forever. Unless acted upon by an outside force. And an outside force could be all kinds of things. It could be gravity, or it could be smacking some alien in the head, like 12 billion years from now. An alien just happens to be walking by like millions and billions of miles away, and the baseball was like, bam, and it hits it in the head, and like, who did that? And little will he know it was me billions of years earlier. I planned it. That would be a force, the alien's head. But until it hits something, some force or some object, it's going to continue moving forever and ever and ever in the direction and at the speed that I threw it. Okay, well, what if I set a baseball on a table and I walk away? Or better yet, what if I set a baseball on a table and then I say to it, move, I order you, by order of my handsomeness. I tell it has to move. Is that going to work? Can I convince the ball to move, not by like blowing on it, but just like my breath, but just by saying to it, move? What do we learn from Newton's first law and also common sense? Obviously not. That's not going to work. So it's going to sit there forever. It's not just going to start moving on its own. We have to apply a force to it. Okay, so that is Newton's first law. An object in motion is going to continue in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. An object at rest is going to remain at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. And again, those forces might be actual physical objects, or they might be like fields, like gravity or static electricity or magnetism or whatever, but some sort of field or force that acts on it might also cause it to alter its course. Hooray. Yes, sir. That is the end of this video. So, yeah. Yep. The video's over now. Hi guys, thanks for watching my video. These rambling science videos where I go unscripted and just kind of barf up all the science knowledge out of my head are part of a series that go along with an online class that I teach, which you can sign up for if you go to handsomescienceteacher.com. I also have a whole bunch of free resources for homeschoolers. I have hundreds of articles on every topic that covers your entire science curriculum from 5th through 8th grade. I have online games and quizzes, all curated and written by this handsome guy, a science teacher with, well, three degrees, but 2 of them are in science. So it's targeted right to and directly to your science students. So sign up, subscribe to the channel, and I release lots of videos. Also, in addition to these ones, lots of little short videos that are like 2 minutes long that cover science topics. Those ones you don't get to see my handsome face, but they're still good videos, and they're much more targeted, and those ones are scripted, so you don't have to hear me like you are right now going blah blah blah. The end. Subscribe. Thank you. Goodbye.